Coming up on this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto, the White House remains adamant that any federal reform of cannabis laws is not on the agenda. Maybe these ads will help.
President Trump had the courage to sign Right to Try, healing American patients. Let's do it again. Reschedule cannabis and put America first. American Rights and Reform PAC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
A political action committee funded by MSOs is spending $1 million on a campaign to remind the president of his campaign promises. And cannabis tax hikes in Ohio get shut down, and we hear from one of the lobbyists who made sure that would happen.
In other words, rather than legalizing, the way the bills were reading was to criminalize. And that's not what legalization is about.
Plus, the founding executive of New York's Office of Cannabis Management, Dashida Dawson, is resigning, while the U.S. Supreme Court sides with a truck driver who tested positive for THC after buying a CBD-only product and now will get triple damages. Plus, in Michigan, it's the Hash Bash, an annual celebration of all things cannabis in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the university, and Amy Carter was there. Plus, Apple unveils a great new product on April Fool's Day. It's the iBong. According to their VP, Trent Vapeworth, it costs only $1,999 and has specific strain pods and charging cables only available through Apple. It looks great, but in reality, it's just another hoax on April Fool's Day. No fooling here. Alaina Pinto is back on Cannabis Coast to Coast News next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, PCMTV's weekly roundup of cannabis news from coast to coast and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. Should I remind you again to download our app? On it, you can get the first look of this news program every week. Plus, it features the most viewed news shows from the past 4 years where we document the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Today, we start with 1 million reasons why there might be more attention on federal reform now. It's actually a $1 million advertising campaign funded by MSOs through the U.S. Cannabis Roundtable and PAC, the Political Action Committee of American Rights and Reform. There are 2 ads. One attacks former President Biden and Democrats, and the other attacks Canada and Democrats. Here's that one.
Canada is attacking American cannabis companies, and Democrats aren't helping. Medical cannabis is legal in 40 states, but Washington treats it the same as heroin. That means American companies can't conduct research and are barred from the stock exchange, while Canadian companies cash in. This is an America First fight. President Trump had the courage to sign Right to Try, healing American patients. Let's do it again. Reschedule cannabis and put America first. American Rights and Reform PAC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
You may not like the methods to the madness that describes President Trump's first 100 days in the White House, but if these ads get attention for the reform measures he used on the campaign trail for rescheduling, it is a step in the right direction. PCMTV founder Jimmy Young talked with the executive director of National Cannabis Industry Association, Aaron Smith.
Thanks, Alaina. Joining me now is Aaron Smith, the executive director of the NCIA. And Aaron and I will be co-hosting the Voice of Cannabis podcast coming up a little bit later in the month of April. We're looking forward to that. But Aaron, the Super PAC, the Political Action Committee, and the U.S. Cannabis Council has released a couple of these videos that are trying to portray President Trump as a hero to the cannabis industry. And I wonder, what's your reaction to that? And at this point, does anything that's positive coming out of D.C. give us some hope?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to know, we're only a couple months into this new administration, so they've got, 1 million priorities in front of them. And so it's important that we do, light a fire under them when it comes to the cannabis issue, because the president did on more than one occasions express positive opinions around the issue. But, it's not at the top of the priority list. And so, these ads, I think the Roundtable did a great job at getting these out there to remind him and those around him in the administration that this is one of the priorities that he promised to move forward.
Right. It's more like, hey, remember, you campaigned on this. You said this. Are you going to live up to it? Is kind of the whole premise of this campaign.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it probably also helps with Congress too, because a lot of Republicans in Congress are still resistant on the marijuana issue. And then you tell them, well, your dear leader over here supported it, and it kind of changes their mind because they are very, very much in lockstep behind the president. So I think it's also, but a lot of them don't know because there's a million things they're dealing with again. So I think it's good to have a reminder out there that this is the position you take, and there's a reason he took that position, and I imagine it's the fact that 3 out of 4 Americans don't support marijuana prohibition.
Right. They want it legalized or at least decriminalized at this point, and any win at this point would be good for the industry. Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah, the industry needs policy reform now more than ever. I mean, it's not easy to operate any business, much less one that is under these high regulations that exist in the states. Ridiculous unfair taxation due to 280E, banking situation. There's a lot of issues that really need to be addressed at the federal level through congressional action and or action from the president, and that's what these ads we're discussing, really deal with is the rescheduling issue.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into some of the inaccuracies of it because the last time I checked, the Controlled Substances Act was introduced by a guy named Nixon when I was like 13 years old, and I didn't like him then, and I still don't like him. He's still haunting me in some capacity. Not that it matters, but that Controlled Substances Act needs to be rewritten. Is there any chance at all that the DEA would ever think about rewriting that, or is that a DOJ thing?
Actually, it would be Congress,
Yeah.
and probably one of the biggest flaws here that we're seeing right now is that the control over what schedule a drug is not in the hands of medical science or the HHS or the FDA or any of these agencies that deal with medicine and science. It's in the hands of the DEA, which is a law enforcement agency.
Mhm.
So it doesn't really make sense because if the HHS, the health authority says cannabis shouldn't be Schedule 1, it should be Schedule 3. Well, that should be the authority. The DEA should just be there to enforce the law. But the way that the Controlled Substances Act was written, under the Nixon administration, then it actually gives all of that authority to either Congress or the DEA. And so I don't think the DEA would want to change that because that would be ceding power. But from a common sense perspective, it doesn't make any sense that DEA would be making the law and enforcing it.
A government that doesn't make any sense. I'm shocked to hear this. Shocked to hear that. Aaron, you and I are going to team up and do the Voice of Cannabis podcast coming up in April. You've already got a couple of guests. Do you want to give a little plug on who might be coming in for at least the first show in mid-April?
Yeah, I can't wait to be back with you on a regular basis with our podcast. We have Jillian Schauer, who's the executive director of CANRA, the Cannabis Regulators Association, to give us a little preview on what she's going to be talking about at our National Stakeholders Summit in Washington, D.C., which is coming up in May, along with our lobby days. I think it's going to be a great conversation and really looking forward to it.
There you go. Well, that'll be in a few weeks. Stay tuned, as they say.
That show is going to be a must-watch program on the PCM TV network and NCIA's Voice of Cannabis with Aaron Smith and Jimmy Young. It debuts on Wednesday, April 16th, and there will be a new episode released every Wednesday after that. In New York this week, the founding director of the Office of Cannabis Management, Dashida Dawson, announced her resignation after 3 years at the helm of the regulatory board that has been plagued by bad hiring practices, out of control illegal storefronts, and multiple lawsuits. It seems that every state with a vibrant adult use legal market has a history of civil disobedience with an annual event, like the New York City Cannabis Parade or the Freedom Rally here in Massachusetts. But in Michigan, it's the Hash Bash, an event that has been held long before cannabis was legalized for adults in that vibrant market. And that market has grown to rival California as one of the top revenue producers in the industry. But this past week, the Michigan Cannabis Regulatory Agency revoked the license of Flavor Galaxy and yanked its processor license after many regulatory violations. The owners, Hannah and Jacqueline Sheena, are now permanently banned from from applying for any new license or joining any other business in that industry. Last year, the CRA recalled over 1,000 infused pre-rolls that did not submit testing in its final form. Cutting corners is frowned upon in any business, and especially one like Flavor Galaxy that made a regular practice of that. No word on whether any member of Flavor Galaxy was at this weekend's Hash Bash in Michigan, but we know Amie Carter was there.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Research with a Michigan Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Today I am reporting from Ann Arbor, Michigan for the 54th Annual Hash Bash Celebration and Rally. The one and only Tommy Chong was featured speaker for this weekend's event.
This year for the beautiful plant, there are wine and
Thousands of cannabis advocates, businesses, patients, and anyone who is proud of the work Michiganders continue to do to move on from prohibition. Despite some doom and gloom in the industry, events like this are so important to re-energize the passion we all have for normalization and acceptance of this powerful plant medicine. It is always such an amazing event. That will do it for this week's Michigan Cannabis Report. And I'm Amie Carter from the Michigan Research with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the two oldest adult use legal markets in the United States is Colorado. There is a continuing story out of that state that once again sheds a light on the issue of hemp and Delta-9 cannabis. Sure enough, a company there is now guilty of fraud, and our Colorado correspondent Xavier Jaillet has an update on the mammoth mess of Mammoth Farms.
I'm Xavier Jaillet, chair of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and a non-attorney professional at the McDonald Hopkins law firm. And here's what's happening in Colorado cannabis news this week. I've got a bit of an update on the last story I reported on, that is of Mammoth Farms suing the Marijuana Enforcement Division. Now we've gained access to expanded information about that lawsuit, in which the CEO of Mammoth Farms, Justin Truard, has alleged that the Marijuana Enforcement Division has both allowed legal regulated marijuana to be diverted from the regulated cannabis market in Colorado to the black market, and has further allowed cannabis operators in Colorado to use illegal, in the state at least, hemp-derived cannabinoids in regulated marijuana products. Now, this expansion focuses on the concept of inversion. Now, inversion is different than the well-known concept of diversion with a D, which is when a cannabis company takes legal, licensed, regulated marijuana and diverts it into the illicit black market. Now, inversion is when a licensed cannabis company takes licensed, regulated marijuana, sells it just like diversion on the black market, but then masks that sale by reintroducing into the market illegal hemp-derived cannabinoid products. Now again, illegal just in the state of Colorado. Hemp-derived cannabinoids, as many know, are federally lawful, but each state takes a different approach into whether or not it allows the sale of such products to consumers in that state. Now, Justin Truard, the CEO of Mammoth Farms, has discovered this discrepancy through review of the metric seed-to-sale tracking system, in which he alleges that certain operators are taking their lawful cannabis, selling it for higher prices than the lawful market on the black market, and then buying low-cost hemp-derived cannabinoid products and reintroducing them into the licensed market to mask the initial diversion. Now that's where the concept of inversion comes from. And this, of course, continues to highlight the battleground of hemp-derived cannabinoid products versus what we'll call marijuana-derived marijuana products, or state legal products versus federally legal products. And this should be a continued battleground and battle for the coming years, as we do not expect much change from the federal administration when it comes to the status of marijuana or hemp. So stay tuned for further updates on this story and for other Colorado cannabis news. That's it for the Colorado Cannabis News Update this week. I'm Xavier Jaillet reporting from Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the A block, but don't go away because we are going international in our next segment, from Europe to Canada, and of course back here in the United States with Doug Miller, who is not so high on Wall Street after the collapse of the stock market and its impact on the publicly traded cannabis stocks. Plus, at the end of the show, PCM TV founder Jimmy Young's Cannabis Confessional from Jason Raposa's podcast. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
This or that, what'll they say?
Flower or vape?
Neither now.
Indoor or outdoor?
Yes.
All of it. Would you have pre-rolls or loose flower?
Yes.
So you consume whatever?
Yes.
Yeah.
How am I doing so far?
Ready to take your craft to the next level? Imagine faster extractions, purer products, and more profits. Sounds good, right? At Pure 5 Extraction, we've revolutionized cannabis extraction with our game-changing technology. No solvents, no heat, just the cleanest, most natural process on the market. Whether you're a boutique grower or a large-scale operation, Pure 5 has the tools to elevate your business worldwide. Visit pure5extraction.com today. Pure 5 Extraction, because your plants deserve the best.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
Welcome back to the B Block, or second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. This is the international segment of our news program, and there is plenty going on around the world. This week, the Czech Republic has introduced access to medicinal cannabis for those with chronic pain, significantly broadening the scope of the program. Also this week, that country is now allowing doctors to prescribe 3 months of the plant medicine, another significant increase to its availability in that country for patients who need it. Another change is any general practitioner in that country can prescribe the plant medicine up from the limited number of 250 who were cannabis certified. Another addition to the law is extending access to the plant for patients under the age of 18 who need palliative care or for cancer. Another European country celebrated its 1-year anniversary of their adult use program in Germany. Here's Ben Stevens with an analysis of the first year of that program.
I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis with this week's European Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. On April the 1st, Germany's pioneering Cannabis Control Bill, also known as CanG, which made it legal for adults to legally possess, consume and cultivate cannabis in their own homes, officially celebrated its first birthday. Early evidence of the impact of this has had on German society and its economic impact is now being openly discussed, but the issue remains highly politicised and controversial. According to the German Cannabis Business Association, in 2024, some 300 million was invested in Germany's cannabis industry, with some 240 million of that going towards its booming medical cannabis market. Furthermore, they suggest that the German cannabis industry is expected to generate revenues of around €1 billion this year. While this has clearly helped cannabis businesses, the Federal Association of Pharmaceutical Cannabinoid Companies, the BBC, argues that it has also benefited patient care in the country. According to the latest figures from Prohibition Partners, as of March 2025, around 500 applications for cannabis cultivation associations, which allow for the non-profit growth and distribution of recreational cannabis, have been submitted, with roughly 190 receiving permits to date. One of the key arguments for the establishment of CanG was that it would reduce crime, curb the black market, and free up time for the judiciary and law enforcement to focus on more serious crimes. Whether this has been achieved in its first year is open to interpretation. According to Spiegel, in the months since partial legalization, approximately 100,000 criminal proceedings have been avoided. Drug-related crime in Germany also fell by around a third in 2024, alongside a 1.7% decline in crime overall. However, the Interior Ministry refutes this assessment, stating that there is no evidence partial legalization has curbed the illegal market or reduced demand in any way. Meanwhile, the Deputy Federal Chairman of the German Police Union said that partial legalization of cannabis has, on balance, not led to any reduction in the police's workload. There is a significant need for training, he said, further education and investment. So, while CanG has clearly had a major impact on the country, whether this is good or bad really depends on who you ask. That's all for this week's European Cannabis Report. I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is the court has dismissed the argument about the cannabis seeds under the Cannabis Act. This is something that many people have been trying to really figure out, especially due to the fact of hemp and cannabis being segregated separately. The federal court has dismissed the claim regarding the legal classification of cannabis seeds seized by the CBSA. The court has emphasized that the Cannabis Act does not differentiate between cannabis seeds and hemp seeds, which is something that is very important since they both originate from the cannabis plant. And what we next have is Tilray moving their Jean Guy, which is their staple strain, over to Montreal, Mason Angers, Quebec, in order to create a more committed strategic plan when it comes to Quebecians, and for their new launch within mid-April. This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
Back here in the States, the state of Oregon continues to struggle with crime and regulatory concerns over the testing of products. Here's Marianne Crisagi with the Oregon Report.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Two stories out of Oregon this week. The first is that after spending over $46 million to reduce unlicensed cannabis operations, the state has finally admitted that they don't know if it has worked at all. There is no insight into what the regulated market is in Oregon. Economist Bo Whitney estimates that in 2020, 75% of cannabis sales were in the regulated market. For 2024, that percentage is estimated to be 68%. That's a pretty big drop and is reflective of the challenges in the Oregon market. Some discussions amongst regulators include asking the question of how much money would have to be spent to make a dent in the unregulated market. It would be interesting to consider what redirecting that funding to regulated operators would do instead. This might be a much better use of taxpayer funds. Also this week, this crime spree continues unchecked as law enforcement are largely silent and unresponsive to the rash of robberies and burglaries. More than a dozen operators have been broken into in the last few weeks. These have mostly occurred at night and no arrests have been made. This is just one more challenge to operators in Oregon. That's the Oregon Cannabis Report. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
So, have you heard about the impact President Trump's tariffs have had on the stock market this week? The Dow's down 2,200 points. And what impact did that have on the cannabis stocks? That's why we have Doug Miller. Let's see if he is still high on Wall Street after this week.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A sharp sell-off rattled Wall Street this week as the stock market suffered its single worst day sell-off in over a year. The Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 all plunged, triggered by fears of inflation, rising interest rates, and of course tariffs. But one sector that could feel the pain even worse is cannabis. Already battling legal hurdles, banking restrictions, and razor-thin margins, the cannabis companies now face increased investor pullback. Popular stocks like Tilray, Curaleaf, and Canopy Growth all tumbled big this week. With capital drying up, expansion plans for cannabis companies may slow dramatically. For the cannabis industry, which has long relied on optimism and projected growth, this market dip could stall momentum and shake out the weaker players. If this downturn continues, cannabis companies will need to cut costs, tighten operations, and brace for a rough ride. For now, our favorite green is red. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
There's actually some good news in Ohio this week as the House there successfully countered the Senate's version of reforms that would have significantly reversed many of the gains from the ballot initiative from a year ago. One of the major lobbyists in Ohio is Tim Johnson, who is ecstatic about the changes to the original Senate bill that had criminalized many of the laws that were approved by the citizens of Ohio at the ballot box 2 years ago. PCM TV founder Jimmy Young talked with Tim this past week.
I think what's going to happen is, okay, we'll talk about House Bill 160. It's the new steering mechanism for what was Senate Bill 56. This will become the new steering mechanism. Originally, it was kind of a layover, almost a copy and paste. But what they did was it was more of a deceptive type layover where they just said, okay, we'll give the home grow, give you back your 12 plants, and we'll let the level 2, level 1s expand to their larger square footage, canopy space, whatever. But after the meeting on Wednesday, fielding the sponsor, Representative Stewart, fielded questions from both sides of the aisle. Very interesting questions from both sides of the aisle. The one I think that's most important is the addressing the mandatory sentencing and the criminal enhancement penalties. In other words, rather than legalizing the way the bills were reading was to criminalize. And that's not what legalization is about. It's about decriminalizing. And that didn't happen. So I think that after Wednesday's meeting, we're going to see a lot of that language come out of there, be refined, such as the sharing a joint or possession in a car, and you go to jail automatically, and these paired drivings and so forth. First time offense is a misdemeanor. Second time's a felony if you got a possession license. So I think a lot of that criminal stuff is what we've been complaining about. That's going to come out. Hopefully, we'll see some positive changes as well for sustainable business models to come out of it as well. That's something that we're working hard on. So I think there's some betterment coming. Once we get back in and they hear some more testimonies and they hear the reality and truth of from the cannabis community. I don't know how much support we're going to get from the industry, but the community's there anyways fighting for it.
Why isn't the industry supporting this? Because they are more concerned about making the money than doing the right thing, or what?
I think they're more concerned about control and actually a monopolistic model for Ohio. That's making more money for them. I think that's going to backfire if they haven't figured that out already with what they did with Senate Bill 56, because we do have, it's well known that the association here in Ohio and the big level ones and some of the MSOs are behind Senate Bill, or were behind Senate Bill 56. So I think they realized that backfired on them. We're able to follow the money, as they always say. transparencyusa.com. All the money's on there. You can follow what you want. So the truth is in the money. Follow the trail and so forth. And I believe their goal was to, by putting enhancing the criminal penalties and so forth and threatening you with jail time right off the bat, I think that it was their new marketing technique maybe to scare the consumer and the patient into using the existing, industry dispensaries. Well, you can't scare us into doing that. What you really did was piss us off.
Now let's hear from our Ohio correspondent, Christina Brisson.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This past Wednesday, the House met to discuss HB 160. Over a 40-minute discussion, they came up with a 6-page amendment. They did say they're not trying to fast-track the bill, but do hope to get it passed by June. And while we all have talked about a lot of the negative changes that can come with this bill, there are a couple positives, and I feel like I'd be being remiss or biased if I didn't mention those. This may offer the possibility for you to be able to get prior possession marijuana charges expunged and a $50 filing fee to get it off of your record, as well as removing the prohibition of retailers not being able to give their consumers samples of their products. But if it weren't for that, we still have Governor Mike DeWine always trying to pull something else from the back door. He's trying to put through changes through a budget measure, where he'd raise the tax from 10% to 20% and remove the allotment to local communities, which is one of the biggest things we have a problem with already that's been trying to happen with the House bill. So this coming 2026, I personally feel like we're lucky that DeWine cannot run for governor again, and hopefully we'll still be able to undo the negative impacts he's had on Ohio and cannabis and other things. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report. I am Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in favor of a trucker who was fired after failing a drug test, even though the trucker bought CBD product and was assured that there was no THC in that product. Doug Horn had been a commercial truck driver for 13 years and was assured the product he bought was THC free. It may have been free on THC on some tests, but when his employer issued a drug test, he failed. He brought suit, lost initially, but won on appeal, and that ended up in the Supreme Court, where now Doug Horn will be awarded triple damages. The Smart and Safe Florida group that led the way to trying to get adult use passed at the ballot box is still out there, but now they will be a few dollars short. The Florida Election Commission is fining Smart and Safe Florida just over $120,000 for missing a deadline on one of their signature campaigns. You do have to think that maybe Governor DeSantis, who is no fan of cannabis and hates the plant smell, might have something to do with trying to thwart Smart and Safe Florida's next ballot campaign. One more state where the legislature is trying to tweak existing laws in an adult use legal state is Arizona. Here's an update with Karen Black.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Let's start at the state capitol. There are still 5 marijuana measures alive, 2 just barely, if at all. HB 2179, which would impose cannabis advertising restrictions, has been controversial from the start because of its definition of marijuana. While it passed the Senate Rules Committee along partisan lines, opposition by Democrats may mean its demise in the full Senate. 3 bills are waiting in committee to examine their constitutionality: expanding access to cannabis in rural areas and allocating a portion of cannabis excise taxes to enforcement of illegal cannabis activity are waiting for the House Rules Committee, while requiring funds to be allocated for medical research is waiting in the Senate Rules Committee. Lastly, a bill that would allow hemp-derived THC-infused beverages to be sold outside of dispensaries missed the deadline to be heard by the House Appropriations Committee and was removed from its agenda. The measure is strongly opposed by the Arizona Dispensaries Association and local law enforcement. The bill is basically dead, so the controversy will likely continue. Moving on to business news, Tilt Holdings is making headlines again, this time for being late on filings and late on rent. Tilt indicated it would not file its annual 10-K report on time, although it expects to do so during the extension period. Also, Tilt received default notices from its landlord, Innovative Industrial Properties, for failing to pay rent on 2 of its retail shops, one in Pennsylvania and the other in Massachusetts. Between the two locations, Tilt is in the hole for over $4 million. Tilt has been working with IIP to sort out the issues and get back on track. They've already paid April's rent, so Innovative Industrial Properties has agreed to hold off on eviction and not terminate their leases, at least for now. Tilt says they're committed to negotiating in good faith to settle the remaining amounts due and secure better terms to keep their operations running smoothly. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B block of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news, but don't go away. Wait until you hear the story about the iBong that Apple introduced on April Fool's Day. Cannabis Coast to Coast news continues after this.
In Willow Creek, Rory, renowned for birdwatching, embraced nature's elegance. Preparing for his woodland sojourn, he used Grape Focus THC Mist from Yellow Labs. Each spritz honed his senses, capturing avian beauty. Immersed in the forest symphony, Rory's lens froze vibrant moments. Emerging at twilight, gratitude filled him for the mist's clarity. Recalling, find Yellow Labs near you. Rory ordered more of his mist from
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, and this is the final section, or the C block of our program today. I'm Alaina Pinto. Final reminder to remember to download the PCM TV app from the Google Play or App Store. Just remember to put a space between PCM and TV so you can get to the app right away, and then you'll have access to everything we do. You can stay up to date on all the stories and challenges being faced in the cannabis industry. Next up, the Chicago clone guy, Mark Allen, with the Illinois Cannabis Report.
What's up, everybody? Chicago clone guy Mark Allen here with Bird. Tuning in from just outside of Chicago, Illinois for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thanks for tuning in. Lots of stuff always going on in Chicagoland. First thing we're going to talk about is the February cannabis sales is actually down in Illinois. This is the lowest it's actually been like for February since 2019. So I don't know what everybody's problem is. Get out there and smoke more weed in Illinois. Come out, do it with us. But I'm sure it'll pick it back up here. But numbers are low, but it'll pick back up. Another thing that I just found out happened last week was an event. It's actually called the Flower Expo. It's the first time I've heard of it. And it's literally a corporatized event with vendors and breeders and commercial growers and dispensaries and whatnot, just like any other big show. Kind of reminded me of NECANN, except it was consumption and it was more hippie vibe with the corporate vibe, which was pretty different. I didn't attend, but I definitely wanted to attend, but I saw pretty cool videos of it on YouTube. And it's a little bigger than I thought. The next stop where the Flower Expo is going to be is actually in Massachusetts and then Michigan this year. So they travel around. Expo seems pretty cool. More interesting news in Illinois. A suburb of Chicago called Oak Park, Illinois, is considering making hemp 21 or the age or older to purchase, just like alcohol. The rest of the state, there's no age requirement to buy hemp, but Oak Park is considering requiring it you to be 21 years old to purchase any hemp products in Oak Park. I mean, they're not really a big town, it's not really a big city, but hey, if that's what the town wants, it's what the town wants. But anyways, that's the news for Chicago, Illinois, and surrounding areas for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Mark Allen. Check it out.
In Missouri this week, regulatory officials transferred more than $23 million collected from cannabis sales taxes to a veterans group and the Health and Human Services Department for Substance Abuse Programs. Missouri continues to set an example for other states on how to roll out a successful, safe adult use cannabis market. Last week, Joe Parsons was in mourning for the second straight year when the governor there, Glenn Youngkin, vetoed an adult use law passed by that state's Senate and House. This week, Joe is licking his wounds and ready for another battle while counting the days before his governor's term is up. Here's Joe.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Virginia Cannabis Control Authority has announced that after 3 years of service, the current acting head and chief officer of regulatory policy and external affairs, Jeremy Priest, will be stepping down from his current position. Jeremy played a crucial role in the early development of the VCCA. Virginia's current medical operations were first handled by the Virginia Board of Pharmacy. When adult use and recreational laws passed in 2021, the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority was born, but not only to handle the current medical market, but the potential adult use market once signed into law. The VCCA's Board of Directors has designated Jamie Patton as the new acting head. With the current veto again of adult use, it is unclear how this new leadership will affect current regulations. But we as Virginian medical card holders can only hope that since the recreational market has been further stalled, that perhaps additional licenses will be offered to allow growth in the medical market, to allow better access and affordability for its patients in the Commonwealth. I wish her all the best. In some well-needed positive news, my own investigation of cannabis-related illegal markets, I found a decrease in arrest and a major decrease of reported pop-up market stores in the last 6 months since I began collecting data. With more Virginians growing their own and seeing the aftermath of the last major takedown in Bedford County last year, many market operators are now using THCA flower as a way to stay in with the current laws. THCA is currently legal and does not fall under the VCCA guidelines. However, the products and the harvesting standards are not tested and can lead to a safe marketplace. And it does nothing to benefit the current economy. We have to continue to work with the lawmakers that will one day make sure we have a safe and regulated retail market that'll benefit more than just a select few. Well, that's going to do it for this week from the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville. And as always, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
Planet 13 is one of the largest dispensaries in the world, if not the largest. After all, the Las Vegas-based dispensary opened in 2018 with 112,000 square feet. This year at MJ BizCon, PCM TV founder Jimmy Young visited the world's largest dispensary. I mean, check out the size of this place. On their quarterly earnings call this past week, Planet 13 announced plans to pump the brakes on their expansion plans. They were hoping to take advantage of the state of Florida's passing of adult use legalization, but when that failed to pass, Planet 13 downshifted. With more from Nevada and the tribal lands, here's Tina Tasaka.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Planet 13 Holdings, Las Vegas, a leading vertically integrated multi-state cannabis company, today announced more grand openings of dispensaries in Florida. The 31st location, a 3,400 square foot dispensary in Port Richey, celebrated its grand opening on March 28th and 29th. Following that, the 32nd dispensary opened its doors in Orange Park on April 4th and 5th. The 4,600 square foot facility serves the medical cannabis community in Jacksonville and is open every day of the year. Brass Knuckles, a legacy cannabis brand, is making a bold return to Nevada through a partnership with Caliente Partners Group. This relaunch features premium all-in-one products in distillate, live resin, and liquid diamonds, plus enhanced transparency via Lucid Green's authentication tech. With a focus on quality, innovation, and consumer trust, Brass Knuckles is now available at select dispensaries like Planet 13, Hardin, and Shango. The Omnibus Cannabis Policy was passed in Minnesota on April 4th, and it has updates pertaining to the Minnesota tribal nations. As stated previously, Minnesota's 11 tribal nations already operate dispensaries on tribal land, ahead of the recreational commercial market launch of 2025. Here's a summary breakdown of the key changes and additions. In the Office of Cannabis Management, OCM, they are officially recognized as a state agency. They are authorized to engage directly with tribal governments on marijuana and hemp issues. In tribal collaborations and protections, tribal medical cannabis boards gain more authority. Patients in tribal or out-of-state programs can access cannabis in Minnesota with a valid registration card. Edible cannabinoid product rules have stricter labeling, testing, and packaging requirements. It also prohibits synthetic cannabinoids like THCO and HHC unless specifically approved. It also now allows on-site consumption at licensed locations. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There's big news out of Oklahoma this week. Oklahomans for Responsible Cannabis Action filed a proposed constitutional amendment for next year's ballot question that would pave the way for an adult use market in that state. Our Oklahoman who uses cannabis responsibly is Kimmy Cannabis, and here's her report this week.
I'm Kimmy Cannabis with Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Oklahoma is once again pushing to legalize adult use cannabis. After several failed attempts in 2022 and 2023, a new initiative, State Question 837, has been filed by ORCA, the Oklahoma Responsible Cannabis Action Group. ORCA's attempt in 2022 didn't make it to the ballot. However, another group raised the signatures for SQ 820. Unfortunately, it was set for a low turnout special election and ultimately failed with just 25% voter participation. ORCA now aims to collect 173,000 signatures to qualify SQ 837, with hopes for the 2025 or 2026 ballot. In other news, on March 25th, a product recall and embargo has been issued by the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority after one company voluntarily reported an investigation led to similar issues with another grow. Mammoth commended the businesses for their transparency and cooperation, which played a key role in quickly removing the affected products from dispensary shelves and protecting patient health. Patients should check batch numbers at omama.ok.gov/recall. If there's a match, dispose of the product safely or contact the dispensary where it was purchased. That's it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Update. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
And finally tonight, we all know that last week was April Fool's Day, and this year Apple got into the act by releasing a new iBong. Yes, Apple announced they were rolling out this exclusive device that costs $1,999 and will only use Apple cables and accessories, of course. You knew something was up, though, when the announcement came from VP of Product Division Trent Vapeworth. And if that didn't get your attention that this might be a joke, the announcement was written by Chip Dankerson. You have to admit, it was pretty clever, especially when the description says it will revolutionize the way you get high. The Bong 3000 features Face ID activation, titanium aeration chambers, and an unremovable mag smoke charging cable that only comes in one color, space resin. You might even hear from Siri, who asks, "You seem paranoid. Maybe go outside." Needless to say, this product never really existed, but give Apple some credit for normalizing cannabis on April Fool's Day. Right? That's this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume responsibly, and we'll see you next time. Wait, no, we won't. There's more. We leave you now with a clip from Good Feels, Jason Raposa's podcast. This week, he invited PCMTV founder Jimmy Young as his in-studio guest, and I guarantee you will learn something about Jimmy that you never knew before. Okay, that's it. We'll see you next time.
This or that, what'll they say?
Flower or vape?
Neither now.
Indoor or outdoor?
Yes.
All of it. Would you have pre-rolls or loose flower?
Yes.
So you consume whatever?
Yes.
Yeah.
How am I doing so far?
Great. High THC or balanced?
Balanced. Hybrid. Sorry.
Do terps matter?
Of course.
Yes. Sativa or indica, or is it all marketing?
It's all marketing because if you buy a hybrid, it doesn't matter, nor should it, because it's terpene profiles, flavonoids, and really and truly how it's grown.
When you consume cannabis, is it an occasional or is it an all day?
It's daily, but usually at night.
Edibles or dabs?
Well, now I take an edible every night with CBN in it, so I'll say edible, especially if my doctor's watching.
Good Vibes, our product. Do you take it straight or do you like to mix it into a drink?
A non-discerning beverage consumer. How's that? I don't really care.
And then if you had a dream smoke session partner, who would that be?
Unfortunately, Jerry Garcia is no longer with us.
Dead or alive?
But I did get to get high with Billy Kreutz, who's the drummer, the original drummer of the Dead, and I'd love to do it again. We had a great talk about sports, and the late Brent Midland was in that room, and it was 86 again. I have some story. I told you I left a lot of stories on the table. You got to have me back now.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Welcome to Pro Cannabis Media, your go-to for all things cannabis. PCM is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news and talk shows with a twist. We've got 16 state correspondents and multimedia journalists from around the US and Canada.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Big Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Green Finger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
Debbie Facey with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
It all started back in 2018 when founder Jimmy Young kicked off the In the Weeds podcast. His mission? Documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Fast forward to today and we've got Cannabis Coast to Coast with Alaina Pinto, delivering the nation's only TV-style cannabis news show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast, PCM TV's weekly roundup of industry news from California to New York. I'm Alaina Pinto.
As of August 2024, PCM has racked up over 1.2 million views and 14.5 million impressions on our YouTube channel. With 15,000 subscribers and growing, our reach is spreading like wildfire. PCM's website, YouTube, Rumble, Discord, Roku, Twitch, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and even our very own PCM TV app. Get your cannabis news fix with Pro Cannabis Media. We're here to keep you informed and entertained. Stay tuned and stay lifted.